Jim McBride is doing his best. He's a beat reporter and reporter for the Bruins at the Boston Globe, and he was able to sit down with Cam Neely and Jim McBride.
Talk to the one guy worth talking to right now.
At
Really.
least if you have to sit there and watch all these games, you should be able to talk to this guy.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, Jim McBride, hello, sir.
Good morning, guys. How's everyone today?
Good. So you sat down with Cam Neely, and how did that come about, and how was the mood of the interview?
Yeah, I think Cam is very sympathetic to what Bruins fans are going through this season. He's as I mentioned in the story, he's a guy that wears his heart on his sleeve when he played, and he exhibits that now. He doesn't like what's going on. He's upset, and like most fans, he wants to change it quickly. And the interview came about just because he was on the road. I was on the road. I put in the request, and he granted it. So we talked in Anaheim during the Bruins morning skate. I believe that was Wednesday. So yeah, he's he's upset, and he hears the fans, and he's not one of these guys that turns a deaf ear to what's going on. He knows, he feels how disappointed Bruins fans are in this season because, like them, I think he had really high hopes last summer after the signings and of several players, and he acknowledges that this season has not gone to plan.
What do you think is bothering Neely the most right now? Is it the way, as you wrote about, he said the guys kind of stopped playing the way that they should? Is it the coaching change that really didn't amount to much? What do you think? What do you think bothers him above all else right now?
Well, I asked what he wanted to see over the last, I think at the time was a dozen games, and he said he wanted the guys to show some heart and some pride, and I think that's what bothers him the most because that's the type of player he was. I don't think he ever gave even a shift for granted in the National Hockey League, especially later in his career when he got hurt and he played through a ton of injuries. And, I think that's what he was alluding to when he said that. And he actually said the words, heart and pride. That's what he wanted to see down the stretch here. And when he doesn't see that, I think that's number one on his list when that bothers him, when he doesn't see guys giving the effort that the game deserves.
Jim, did you get any sense in talking to Cam that there's some desperation for his job now? I mean, the bad drafting has come back to haunt them. There aren't a lot of good young players in this system to fill voids. They've made bad free agent signings like Elias Lindholm. When you spoke to him, is there a feeling that he understands he's on the clock now?
No, I don't think he fears that. I think he appreciated it. I asked him about the Jacobs family and their support, and they've shown several times. I mean, I think at the black and gold gala, Charlie Jacobs mentioned his support for Cam and Don Sweeney, and I think the statements they released right after Brad Marchand was traded at the deadline, that Charlie said he has the support of his management team, and Cam mentioned specifically how much he appreciates that because that allows them to do their job without looking over their shoulder. Now, whether he thinks differently privately, away from my microphone and my questions, I'm not sure, but he doesn't strike me as the type of guy who's, walking on eggshells and worried that he's going to get canned. I think he appreciates the support of ownership, which has been pretty unwavering during his time as vice president and now president. So, no, I didn't get that desperation sense from him.
Okay, so the more time that's passed and the more that you know about the contract negotiations, do you think that ultimately that the team was surprised they ended up moving Marchand? Like that they thought that the negotiations would go better based on what they were offering?
Yeah, if you go by the media reports and what was out there, I think from Elliot Friedman in Canada. Yeah, I'm a little surprised, but I'm also not. I would not be surprised if Brad's back in this summer.
Okay, now we're talking. So that's
right.
Surprising. All right, go ahead.
The fact that Don mentioned that during that post trade deadline press conference that the doors never closed and how much Brad loved being here. The fact that they didn't name another captain I could see a possibility where Brad comes back and is the captain. And I think, you know, you need a player like like him. Not that there's a ton of players like him, but you need somebody who's kind of an attitude setter. And I think that they're lacking that right now. It was particularly evident on the road trip. I thought that, you know, there wasn't you know they lost McAvoy to injury. You know, they traded Brad. You know, and it's all on Pasta, who, you know, to give him his due, you know, David's a really stand up guy. He talks every time he's asked, and he answers every question honestly. But he's by himself right now as a established leader in that locker room. So how do you fix that? You go out and get another leader, and there's a leader that's well acquainted with the you know, with the organization and the atmosphere around this team, and that's Brad Marchand. And I don't think that they were, you know, a ton far away from where they could have, you know, met in the middle for a contract. But the fact the way the season was going, you know, now maybe you get a first round draft pick and you get Brad Marchand back. And I think, you know, most fans would like that trade right now.
Okay,
Even though
so
they probably hate seeing Brad in a you know, Panthers.
I think you're overestimating the vitriol of the fan or the interest of the fan base right now.
well, I tell you,
I wonder how many people are going to see Brad in a Florida.
I was
uniform.
interested to see him playing already. Did that surprise you, Jim?
No, I think it was about the 2 week timeline that he had talked about. That you know, he knew when he skated that first day in Boston that wasn't, you know, that he wasn't going to be playing anytime soon. But you know, I think Don had mentioned 2 to 3 weeks. They thought he was away from playing, and I think it's been almost 3 weeks since the trade deadline. So I think this is what they were hoping for. I don't know if they expected him to set up the game-winning goal in overtime on his first game back, but he did.
Yeah. Okay, so you talked to Cam a little bit about the coaching and about Joe Sacco, and I believe he said something about him being in the mix moving forward. Do you think that's an honest assessment of the situation?
Yeah, I think they're going to, you know, examine all possibilities. I think they're realistic in the fact that Joe walked into a tough situation this year. They were under 500 when he was hired. And you know, they've had a lot of adversity. They've had a lot of injuries. You know, the roster was completely, you know, made over on deadline week. And you know, Joe's been a good soldier in this organization for 10 years, so I think he deserves at least the benefit of being, you know, as Cam said, in the mix when they evaluate that position. You know, I don't know if he's atop their list, but I think they have to be at least appreciative of the efforts he's put in this year to keep this team, you know. I won't say competitive on most nights. Certainly the road trip, there were times where the compete level was lacking.
Well, you saw Jim Montgomery is having a lot of success with St. Louis right now. Yeah, and so, I mean, this isn't good. I mean, they fired Cassidy because he was too tough. He goes and wins the Stanley Cup. They fire Montgomery because he's too nice and lost control of the team. And now he's on the front page of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch about. I mean, there's literally like he's on the front page.
They've won 9 games in a row.
About like how he's taken the team and taken the organization and turned it into a team and turned it. I mean, I personally believe this is a poor reflection on the organization. 2 coaches now that you fired have turned around and immediately done a superlative job at their next positions. And it's not like St. Louis was set up like so much better than the Bruins were.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough look when you look at the guys that have been behind the bench. It's at least the last 2 times, even the last 3 times. I mean, Claude was hired almost immediately by the Canadians when they fired him too. So yeah, tough look coaching wise. So they're going to have to get someone that can come in and you know, be an impact coach and be able to relate to today's players while also, you know, setting a tone where guys have to be accountable, and that's not always easy, especially with today's younger players. And this team is going to be a young team next year. There's going to be a lot of, you know, new faces and young faces if it goes according to plan.
So what makes this an attractive franchise to a big-name head coach who might be out there picking between jobs? So what makes this franchise attractive to prospective free agents like a Mitch Marner, other than, it's an original six with a nice fan base?
Well, I think that's big right there. You don't want to play in front of an empty barn, and players often mention original six. I think there's still some building blocks and some solid foundation on this team. They have Pasternak, they have Charlie McAvoy, they have Jeremy Swayman. Now, the latter two have not had great seasons for injuries and other reasons, but there's still players in this organization that I think other teams would like to play with, and also the almighty dollar comes into it, and the Bruins are going to have some money to spend this summer with the increased salary cap and all the money they shed at the trade deadline. So I think those reasons are still attractive to come here.
All right. What's it going to take to beat Washington tomorrow night, Jim?
Yeah.
Alex Ovechkin to take the night off.
Yeah.
Hey, we actually, there's something compelling to watch about that game. Yes,
it would have been nice if he got hotter a little sooner, then you could be seeing him break the record.
Still 4 short. That's a problem.
Unless he goes crazy. All right. Well,
they're a team that you can point to as a team that turned around. I mean, they just snuck into the playoffs last year as on the last day as the last seed, and they came out this year. Made a few changes, but they set the world on fire this year. So you can turn things around quickly in this league, as you guys know.
Right. Yeah, we'll see. All right, Jim McBride, thank you so much. Read him in the Boston Globe. He's got a great sit-down with Cam Neely. We appreciate your time, sir.
For more Bruins analysis and opinion, hit this playlist. And for all the latest from the Sports Hub, download the app at 985thesportshub.com.